Welcome. I am the Keeper of Tales, the conveyor for all tales of the supernatural and unknown. I have just the thing for you today. Episode 2. So sit back, relax, and prepare yourself for another tantalizing tale.
Steve, Jason, Cedric, and me, Todd. This was my pack. My group of friends that I had amassed in my teenage years. We did almost everything together. We all met at school because we were all from different neighborhoods. There was a time, though, that we were not close at all. We were all shy and in our own world, but nothing brings boys together like a good fight. You see, when I was growing up, a fight didn't lead to a shootout. Typically, after a fight, there was maybe a rematch or two. Shared blood and tears, those two young men would become the best of friends. This is how we all became friends. At one point or another, we were enemies. In my early years, there was always safety in numbers. It afforded you protection, since loners were typically singled out for daily bullying at school. This was something you wanted absolutely nothing to do with. It was truly a miserable existence. And so we protected each other, but the best thing of all was that through this friendship, we realized that we had a lot in common. From the love of football to trekking to the local library to read comic books, we were always hanging out whenever we got a chance to. One weekend after a day of playing football, we decided to relax at Cedric's home. This was our usual spot to unwind after a long day of running wild through the neighborhood. It was about the only place we could just be ourselves. You see, Cedric's mom was a bit friendlier than our mothers. It was also the only place where we could just be ourselves without having a list of rules to follow. His mom would always say,
"Boys will be boys,"
and allowed us the freedom to be just that if we were not too loud, didn't burn down the house, or cause the police to show up at the door. On this day, we decided to play cards. We played a card game called Lurks. Well, if you know, you know, but if not, I am afraid you are not in the know. In any event, we grew tired of this card game and decided to play another card game called Spades. We formed our teams and moved the game to the kitchen area. There was a table there that gave us enough room to play the game without any issues. It wasn't a big kitchen, so the table was right next to the door that led to the backyard. In any game of spades, what would it be if there wasn't smack talking and table shacking, slamming of the cards? Those that have played know exactly what I am talking about. It's a fun game, but defiantly not for those that aren't a bit competitive. As night began to fall, none of us were interested in walking home. We decided it would be cool if we spent the night. Agreeing, Cedric summoned the courage to ask his mom after a few minutes of us boosting his courage. Upon him leaving the room, it was all quiet on the Western Front. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, he returned and just stood there in the doorway.
"Well, what did she say?"
Cedric didn't say anything and only stood there staring back at us. "Come on, man, just spill it," I shouted excitedly. With that, a smile began to creep onto Cedric's face, and before he could even say a word, we were all cheering and laughing. He confirmed what we already thought, but had an added stipulation.
"Listen, my mom says you guys can spend the night as long as your parents give the okay."
Well, there was nothing more that needed to be said. We all got to work calling our parents. I wasn't sure about the other guys, but as for me, I knew that my mom would relish the idea of being without me for the weekend. I think all my mom heard was "spend the night," said yes, then asked for the address to bring me a change of clothes. Before long, it was official, and the sleepover was on. We all showered, changed into our night clothes, and headed back to the kitchen to finish our game of spades. As we played, I had no idea what time it was. We were boys just having fun. Cedric's mom's voice cut through the ruckus like an air siren before the storm.
"Cedric! Don't forget to take out the trash."
"Oh, man."
Cedric moaned in protest. We all sat there for a few moments staring at each other.
"Well, the trash isn't going to throw itself out."
We all started laughing at the statement. Cedric stood up and walked over to where the trash bin stood. As he began taking the trash from the bin, I hopped up from my seat and unlocked the door. Now we lived in the city, so there was no worry of having a forest in the backyard or coming across any wild animals. Even so, when I opened the door and looked outside, it was pitch black. I turned to look back at Cedric. "Man, it's dark as hell out there," I exclaimed with a hint of fear in my voice.
"We have a light outside."
I sighed with a bit of relief, but that would be short-lived. Most homes in the neighborhood had what were called security doors and bars on the windows to prevent burglary. So Cedric first unlocked the metal security door, which swung inward. We then searched for the key to unlock the other door. Once we had the key, we unlocked the main door to the house, which was wooden. Cedric, with the trash bag in hand, he retrieved from the bin, walked over to the door, and flipped a switch on the wall next to the door. After a few seconds, a light flickered on. The light shined brightly on the back porch, leaving the rest of the yard barely illuminated. About 100 feet from the back door, you could barely make out a big trash can sitting off to the side. Now, of the many times I had been to my friend's house, this was the first time I had seen his backyard. Maybe in the day it wasn't so bad, but it's the dead of night now, and it looked like something out of the movie Halloween. Totally expected Michael Myers to appear at any moment as I stared into the backyard. We all stood there staring into the darkness, not saying a word. The yard was covered with what looked like brown leaves from the tree that was in the yard. There was no moon to give any assistance. There was only the light from the porch. Cedric handed the trash bag to Steve.
"Come on, one of you got to take it out. I asked if you could spend the night."
Made sense, but was he doing this because it was the fair thing to do, or because he was just as scared as we were? Steve didn't bother to debate. He just slung the trash bag over his shoulder and started walking towards the bin. As he walked out into the yard, you could hear the leaves crunching under his feet with each step, breaking the silence of the night. About halfway there, Steve abruptly dropped the trash bag and then turned running full speed back towards us. Startled, we could only watch as he bolted past us shouting,
"There is something out there. I heard it growl."
We all looked out the door, out into the backyard, and back at each other. What did he hear? Steve just stood behind us, breathing heavily and staring out into the backyard.
"I'm not going back out there. One of you guys go."
Cedric was the first to break the silence.
"It's probably just a possum or a raccoon. That's nothing to be afraid of. It's probably more afraid of you than you are of it."
After some banter back and forth between us, I decided to be the next one to give it a go. I wasn't the brave one of the bunch, but hearing Cedric's reassurances that it was probably only an opossum or raccoon, I was okay with getting the job done. As I walked over to the door, I scanned out into the darkness, trying to see whatever Steve heard. There was nothing. Slowly, I stepped out into the light of the back porch and made my way over to the trash bag Steve had dropped a few feet away. Once there, I stood there looking around. I looked back at my group of friends standing in the doorway. They were of no help. They just stared back at me with these blank faces, half terror, half wonder, mouths agape, eyes wide. I turned and picked up the trash bag. The leaves crunched under my feet as I took a few more steps in the direction of the trash can, my eyes darting back and forth looking for any movement. As I got closer to the trash can, I could have sworn I heard something. I stopped for a moment to listen, but didn't hear anything. So, I continued towards the trash bin. Then I heard it. I am not sure if it was a growl, yelp, or what, but I heard something that froze me in my tracks. I was not hearing things. There was something there. My body tensed up. But then, in my mind, I convinced myself that I had nothing to fear from some critter. I took another step closer and saw the lid of the trash can move ever so slightly. I stopped. My eyes fixated on the trash can. I was poised, ready to face whatever critter came out at me. But then in my horror, I watched as the lid opened, revealing two red eyes peering back at me. What the hell is that? I remember thinking to myself. The eyes blinked once, and then again. The next thing I hear is some kind of demonic screech. My survival mode kicked in as I threw the trash bag I was carrying in the direction of the trash can and took off running back towards the house. I could see my friends shouting to me, frantically waving their arms for me to come as I ran, but I didn't hear a sound. I just ran, never looking back and bolting past them as they stood in the doorway. Once I was past them, I could hear the door slam loudly behind me. As we stood there at the door, we could hear growling coming from the other side of the door, and whatever it was scratching angrily at the door. We locked both doors, and we all ran to Cedric's room. We sat in Cedric's room for a long time with the light and television on, not saying a word, until finally Cedric spoke.
Man, we made all that racket for nothing. Told you it was just a raccoon or something.
I saw it. It wasn't a raccoon or an opossum. It was some thing. It was all black and it had pointy ears. It had long arms with claws. It ran all fours and I could see its sharp pointy teeth as it ran after you.
And then there was silence. No one spoke another word. Eventually, we all fell asleep and awoke the next morning to Cedric's mom cooking breakfast. It seemed that all was well and last night's events were forgotten. As we sat at the table, now rubbing our full bellies, Cedric stood up and unlocked the doors. He went outside and stood looking at the outside of the door. We all followed to see what he was looking at. And there, on the door, were long scratch marks, as if something had been clawing at the door. None of us mentioned that night again. And the trash, yeah, it's getting taken out in the day only.
Now those young men got a bit more than they bargained for. That's the chance you take when you go out into the night. Be sure to tune in for another tale. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And should you find yourself lost during your travels, let the light be your guide.